there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the Great Books from Shithole Countries tag. This tag was created by Diana in Color, who has a fairly new booktube channel, and I will link to her original video below. I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac, and I will link to his channel below as well. The name of this is obviously a reference to comments from the current American president. If you don't know, I've lived in the United States for 4 years now, and people ask me when I am elsewhere, what is happening here? And I don't have an answer to that. It's like when I was at this family party in Belgium over the summer, and a number of my aunts and uncles were like, are people not embarrassed? And I had to say, you know, I think about half of them, or maybe somewhat more than half of them are, but the other half? I don't even know. In any case, the idea of this tag is to name great books that you have either read or not read that are from countries that are either in Africa and also Haiti and El Salvador. So I'll talk about books that I have read first, and I think if you've seen me do any kind of tags on this channel, I was obviously going to mention Sello Duiker's writing. I always talk about The Quiet Violence of Dreams, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and also his first novel, 13 Cents. Both of these are very hard and challenging looks at life in the early 2000s in Cape Town. Sello Duiker unfortunately took his own life a number of years ago, so he only ever published 3 books. The third one, The Hidden Star, I have somewhere, but I couldn't find it to pull it out, and it is, quite frankly, not quite as compelling as these two. These are both quite depressing reads, but I thought this is an absolute masterwork. This one is a short little book, not a long read, but it is about a homeless child prostitute, so you might not want to read this if you were in a super depressing mood, but this is just an absolute masterpiece that I think everyone should read. And I usually talk about this being set in Cape Town, but it actually goes to a number of places and talks to a number of people from different areas, and is just a really spectacular piece of writing. I'm also going to mention one of my favorite books of last year, which was Hisham Matar's In the Country of Men, which I almost didn't hold up, because I feel like when people say insulting things about Africa and the US, they forget that North African countries are actually in Africa. Even people who are not of the type who would make the kind of comments that this tag is a response to seem to be really confused about geography. I was taking a project management class when I was living in Northern Virginia a couple of years ago, and one of my classmates was Tunisian. This book is set in Libya, but in any case, and a lot of the people in that class who were educated people, professional people of a variety of political backgrounds and everything, and just, you know, had no idea where that was, and were looking at her and trying to go, well, where is that? Is that in the Middle East? It's just, I don't know. In any case, this is about a young boy growing up in Tripoli in the late 70s, and is a beautiful look at place and a child's view of politics. Another favorite of mine from last year that I don't own because I had it out of the library, but that I will probably pick up at some point, Fiston Mwanza Mujila's Tram 83, which is set in a country that is basically not specified, but it's pretty much the DRC, in a city that's called City State, but is very Lubumbashi-esque, and it is somewhat about a man who is a writer, but it's really about the mood and the atmosphere in this particular club/bar that he goes to with his friends, and it just uses the best use of both repetition of words and of lists that I have ever seen. I'm also going to mention Simão Kikamba's Going Home. This is a book that I didn't think was 100% successful in terms of writing. It is a story within a story. This is something that I would especially encourage Americans to read, just because I feel like a lot of the Americans that I meet, and again from a variety of political backgrounds, look at immigration and migration from the perspective of people moving to the United States, maybe to Western Europe or Canada, but overwhelmingly to the United States. There's such a perception here that, you know, people coming and all of that. And the reason I mention this is about an Angolan man who is of Congolese parentage who has migrated to South Africa, and he's telling his story. Which is not to say that there's something wrong with migration towards quote-unquote the West, because another book that I would, or writer that I would recommend is Daniela Faria, who is, of course, who is the Haitian writer who wrote the very famous and controversially titled How to Make Love with a Negro Without Turning Black back in the mid-80s. And then later, why must a black writer write about sex? Books with a lot of titles that get one talking. He was somebody who moved to Canada in his 20s and wrote a lot about that experience. There is a movie of How to Make Love to a Negro Without Getting Tired, which is probably dated. There is a lot of that screams mid-80s, but I think if you can deal with that dated element, I definitely think those are worth looking at. I'm also going to mention quickly a piece of nonfiction that I have always been impressed by, and that is the Mau Detainee by Josiah Mwangi Kariuki. This is a memoir of having been detained during the Kenyan independence struggle. This is a short little read. Tells you about the independence struggle in a non-romantic way, because this was written so close to the time that it doesn't have the grander scope that something that was written much later would, but I think the immediacy in this makes it still interesting even though it's dated. Let's go into some books that I am looking to read. One book that I bought a little over a year ago and then forgot that I had, but I remembered seeing it when Sean held this up in his video, is We Need New Names by NoViolet Bulawayo. This is a story about kids growing up in Zimbabwe and eventually moving to the United States, I believe. It's described as a potent story of displacement and arrival. Although, speaking of Zimbabwe, if you want to pick up a classic, Nervous Conditions. This is set during the colonial period in the 60s and is about a girl who's going to a British school and dealing with body image. A couple of books that I have out of the library right now are The Lights of Pointe-Noire and Broken Glass, both of which are by Alain Mabanckou, who is a Congolese writer, specifically Congo-Brazzaville. Originally, when I'd heard about him, although you'd think I would know from the title, I had assumed DRC, but no. This is, I believe, a memoir of the author going back to Congo-Brazzaville after having been gone for a number of years. Yeah, he left in 1989 when he was in his 20s, and then this was written when he returned fairly recently, so I think that will be interesting. And then Broken Glass is a novel, which is about a man who's left his country and left his wife and, you know, keeps books that he doesn't read, apparently. So we will see how that is. It was translated by Helen Stevenson. And finally, another book that I picked up about a year ago and then forgot about after we moved because I rearranged my books is The Orchard of Lost Souls by Nadifa Mohamed. This is, I believe, the story of 3 different women. Yeah, a young girl, a widow, and then a female soldier in Somalia in 1987. So that should be interesting, and that has a very interesting cover. And then finally, I realized as I was watching Sean's video and he was talking about a couple of books that I don't think I've ever read anything from El Salvador, which is surprising to me because my parents both lived in El Salvador and that is actually where they met each other, and I've never read anything set there. I don't even know if my parents had books that are set there because they definitely had books in Spanish, but I don't read Spanish, so I've never looked at them to even know what those were. That was pretty eye-opening to me because as much as I'm kind of have talked a bit about my neighbors and being shocked at what they don't know, I'm kind of shocked that I've never read anything that was set there. But in the comments on Sean's video, he suggested that we do a buddy read of Tyrant Memory, which I forget the author's name, but I will link it below. So I think maybe I will read both of those this year and fix that gap in my reading because that's clearly something I'm missing out on. So that is my take on this video. If you have not been tagged and you do have some recommendations or some books out of the library or in your collection that you haven't read yet, I would be interested to see what you have because I feel like everyone has their own lens through which they view the rest of the world. And I think it's definitely interesting to see where everybody's focus is on specific countries, because I know I've seen a number of people do this video and talk very specifically about, for example, Haitian American writers and about West African writers. And I find that really fascinating. So if you have suggestions, and I think it can be anything from 1 to 20 that would fit into this category, consider yourself tagged. I'd like to thank Diana for creating this tag because I found it really fascinating to watch what other people have done with this. And thanks to Sean for tagging me. That's it for now. Ciao.